Myself, Jagdish Chand Joshi, Senior Vice President, Macleod Pharma, welcomes each one of you on a webinar, Management of Macromycosis. We are already fighting COVID-19 and mucormycosis is a burning topic right now. With this, I hand over session to Dr. Mamta Jain for the introduction of all the speakers panelists.
Thank you, Mr. Joshi. Thank you so much. And as rightly you said that we have not even learned how to manage COVID-19 and now we are struggling with new challenges of mucormycosis. We're still learning how to and grappling with this problem every day, learning more about it, every day the headlines. And it's sad to see that we are losing patients because of either drug overdose or COVID itself. We still don't know. But these challenging times is the right time that we call all the experts and learn from them. What better to have a moderated discussion from peer to peer to understand from various specialties, to understand how do they manage in each of the doctors today are actively involved in managing COVID. They are all frontliners. They have been checking it across, seeing the patients every day. Learning from their practical experience will actually help us, if not completely manage cure, but at least be more prepared to manage mucormycosis. I'm just going to share my screen to introduce the panel today. And if you see my screen today, the first moderator is Professor Dr. Ketan Mehta. He's a consultant physician, cardiopulmonologist, and diabetologist, attached to Asian Heart Institute, Suchak Hospital, Nama Hospital, and Lifeline Medicare Hospital. Honorary General Secretary with ISC from 2020 to 22, and Vice President with IMA, I think Maharashtra Wing, 2019 to 20. Editorial Board member with JAPI, Journal of Medicine of Nutraceutical, Medical Nutrition and Nutraceutical. But not just that, he is being at various positions of organizing national conferences as organizing secretary from way beyond from last 15 years. Actively involved into academics at various association levels. And a frontliner. What I said is day in and day out seeing COVID patients. What better than him to have moderated? Welcome, Dr. Ketan Mehta. Our next person today, the faculty today, is Dr. Manish Munjal. He's a consultant ENT surgeon at Sir Gangaram Hospital, New Delhi. Award-winning doctor right from his registrar post and teaching. He's been teaching DNB medical students with numerous and various publications from ENT journals. Invited faculty in voice and airway surgery conferences on the executive board for Delhi Association of Otolaryngology of India, Laryngology and Voice Association, and his main area of interest is voice, airways, swallowing disorders. Now, the question probably you would feel is, why is he a part of it? Because he is a frontliner in Delhi today at Gangaram Hospital, who's been managing mucormycosis right from the day that we've started seeing it, operating day in and day out, managing those cases. So who better than a frontliner who's managing mucormycosis and telling us across. Our next, so welcome Dr. Munjal. Hello. And then our next faculty today is Dr. Nikhilesh Jain. He is a fellowship, he's a critical care and intensivist, fellowship in critical care medicine. He's a director and operational head and Department of Critical Care Services at CHL Hospital, Indore. Right from the first year, last year himself, despite having COVID himself, he went around seeing patients, treating them. It's been a year that he's been attached to ICU, seeing the most serious patients, treating them, managing. He has a recognized faculty across national and international critical care forums, with more than 50 national and international papers, over 60 lectures as faculty chairperson, and various international forums. He has been an instructor with ACLS and all of it. But in today's context, as a frontliner, managing COVID patients and mucormycosis every day. Welcome, Dr. Nikhilesh Jain. The next person is a young endocrinologist from Mumbai, Dr. Altamash Sheikh. Dr. Altamash Sheikh is again a frontliner today managing COVID patients. He's attached to major super specialty hospitals in Mumbai. He's been award winning from 2017, 15, 16. I mean, all the years that he's been getting awards, but that apart, he's been being the speaker apart, which is there. He is managing diabetes patients in COVID wards, looking onto it, getting out into the strategy, how to take it across, manage it. And let's understand from him what is the role of a diabetologist or managing sugars in mucormycosis. So welcome, Dr. Sheikh. Last and the most senior faculty today, Dr. I.S. Reddy. He's a dermatologist from Hyderabad. He's a senior consultant and one of the very special reasons from a senior consultant from Apollo City Jubilee Hospital in Hyderabad. He has been a past president with IADVL, Andhra Pradesh branch, chairman, scientific committee with QTCon, and very, very active professor, teacher. But the reason that he is here, that 15 years back when people were not talking about mucormycosis, among the first papers getting published on the cutaneous presentation of mucormycosis came from Dr. Reddy. And over a period of years, he has been one who's been constantly looking into it, seeing the cases, researching about it. And now with COVID, again, seeing post-COVID complications or during COVID complications, both from cutaneous and mucormycosis. So welcome, Dr. I.S. Reddy. I'm stopping to share my thing and handing over without wasting any time to Dr. Ketan Mehta to take it across. And let's all learn together about mucormycosis.
Thank you, Mamta. A very good evening to all of you, all the distinguished faculty present over here. At the onset, I would like to thank Dr. Mamta Jain and McLeods for arranging such a fantastic webinar, which will be of utmost importance in today's time when we are seeing so many cases pertinent to today's talk. Friends, you all are seeing the patients in COVID time, be it in Tier B, Tier C or Tier C cities, and all of you are facing with, there are patients coming with various complications related to COVID. Friends, we have been seeing there is literally a tsunami of various storms which are coming one after the other. We saw the COVID, which came like a major storm. We all started learning about it, we started facing it. It has gone in a partial way and then again reappeared by the month of February this year. We started learning. Then there was another storm which started coming, which is so many people really said how to pronounce also difficult, was Tautiki. And that also we have seen how the west coast of India, which was getting affected. Now, before it has gone, there was another wave of Yash storm, which is about to be anticipated on the east coast. And amongst this, there is another big storm which has really captured our country. And that is, you must have seen highlighted in multiple print media, multiple magazines, bulletins, everywhere. That is all about the black fungus. So friends, what we are going to discuss today is this terminology which we also have heard for the first time, that black fungus, we call it a mucormycosis. Now, when this COVID came, people knew that there will be some complications which is likely to happen after the treatment. The commonest first fungal infection which came after this viral infection was Kappa, which was known, that was COVID-associated pulmonary aspergillosis that was first reported. And then people saw few isolated cases of Kappa, which was there, but it was a very small number, which was there seen globally over there. Now, suddenly with this second wave, what we have been seeing that these are the cases of mucormycosis, which has started rising in number, and to the extent it has really captured the country in a big way. Today, we have already crossed 8,800 cases of mucormycosis in our country. The three states which is contributing to almost 60% of these cases, they are Maharashtra, Gujarat, and Andhra Pradesh. The other three states which are also affected are Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, and Karnataka. So if you take these 6 cases, they are contributing almost to the tune of 80% of cases of mucormycosis. If we recollect the first case, which was reported from Gujarat itself, of Surat in this post-COVID time, which was then had gone to the government and then it had done the analysis. And after bombarding from a lot of agencies, now the Ministry of Health has put it as a notifiable disease. And 20th May, just 3 days back, it has come that it is an epidemic of mucormycosis and it has become a notifiable disease. So keep it in mind, if you see any patients of mucormycosis now, it is mandatory to inform the local health authorities because it is a notifiable disease. Another so much misnomers, people started calling it black fungus. Now, what is it, black fungus? Is it a black in color? No, it's a totally misnomer. Mucor is not black in color just because it produces necrosis and the black colored lesions. People started calling as a black fungus. And then obviously we have seen that other colored things which come, you must have read in the news also from Patna, there was a white fungus which came into the limelight. And if this continues, what will happen tomorrow? The Mycobacterium tuberculosis may be known as, because of hemoptysis, red color bacteria, and the hepatitis virus will be known as yellow virus. So this is not a color which is going to be. So anyway, let's learn it from our distinguished faculty all about this mucormycosis. I will come to Dr. Reddy first, the senior most faculty over here. Sir, so can you throw some lights about this black fungus and white fungus, since this news has come up so much? So what is this white fungus and black fungus? And you will also tell us that what are the commonest fungal infections? Because whenever we talk of fungal infections, it is always, we keep it in mind that the dermatologists are the one who are seeing maximum number of fungal infections. So can you throw some light on it?
Yeah, it's a good question. To start with, as you rightly said, black fungus. The mucormycosis, first it manifests in the skin. It presents as a diffuse swelling over the face. If it is rhino cerebral mycosis, mucormycosis, it presents as a red swelling, and slowly it becomes little sort of bluish, and over a period of time, because of the necrosis, the skin becomes totally dark. That's why the lay press, they started branding this as a black fungus. In fact, if you look at the fungus in the skin or in under the culture, it is nowhere near the color of black. Therefore, the black fungus, the name is derived mainly because the appearance, the necrotic skin giving the black appearance, that's why it has been named as a black fungus in the lay press. Coming to the white fungus, I'm surprised to see that. What is this white fungus? I really don't know what's going on. Then I just looked into that video you have sent in our the group, this thing, app. And then I came to know what he means to say as a white fungus is nothing but candida, candidiasis. It's very common in a large group of patients, especially in diabetics and immunosuppressed patients. And then especially with this epidemic of the COVID, because of the usage of steroids, with the underlying background of diabetes, we can see a lot of patients presenting with candidiasis involving the oral cavity. That's what he means as a white fungus. And coming to the third question, as a dermatologist, we have been seeing an epidemic of fungal infection going on in the country, entire country, in the form of ringworm, what we call as dermatophyte fungus. Dermatophyte fungus, that is otherwise called Tinea cruris, Tinea corporis, Tinea fasciae, different forms of fungal infections presenting in the in the population. But this particular fungal infection, tinea, I don't think it has got any fluctuations because of the COVID. Because the COVID, what we are seeing more and more number of patients are these fungal infection due to mucar, and maybe to some extent the other doctor has mentioned white fungus. It's called candida. Candidiasis, especially the oral cavity, especially in diabetics. I think we are seeing more number of cases of candidiasis in the form of white fungus.
Okay. Thank you. That was a very good information which you gave pertinent to white fungus. So, sir, here I would like to ask, now there was practically, now the time has come where we talk about the BC and AC. When we said BC is the before COVID era and AC is after COVID era or during COVID era, the things which has changed. So have you really seen changing pattern of cutaneous fungal lesions in before COVID time and the current COVID time?
Yeah, definitely. I think because of the various reasons, we really don't know. One of the reasons for the mucar, I feel it is after all, it is a ubiquitous fungus. It is there everywhere. It is there in the soil. It is there in the air. It is there in the dust. If the environment of the patient, if it is not maintained properly, if there is a conducive situation like diabetes, immunosuppressed state, and steroid usage, and definitely what is supposed to be a very, very harmless fungus, that is mucar, can cause devastating changes in the form of what we are experiencing now in the form of mucormycosis. And other than that, as I said earlier, we don't see many increased number of other fungal infections like tinea. Of course, candida must be there, and aspergillus also is one of the other fungal infections commonly seen in this kind of patients. Earlier also, these fungal infections are all there because especially they're all common in immunosuppressed patients, patients receiving chemotherapeutic drugs, patients receiving various other cancer treatments. These kind of group of patients, they are more prone for this particular type of infections. Because of various other reasons, now suddenly we are seeing the very, very increased incidence of these cases of mucormycosis.
Okay, thank you. So you rightly said that already the pre-existing or common fungal infections prevails as it is, but only there is an increased incidence of mucor which has come in the COVID time. Okay, I will come to Dr. Manish. So, Dr. Manish, can you now elaborate on what is now exactly this mucormycosis all about and what is the common mode of transmission? Manish.
Well, as Sir has really mentioned, he's seen this fungus probably before we were born, and that means it has been there all throughout. We all know that. I had been in this interesting webinar just a few days ago where Professor Chakravarti from the mycology department in PGI, we discussed at length. And surprisingly, there have been so many studies in 3 major institutes in the last 3 years or so, like CMC Vellore, PGI Chandigarh, AIMS, and they probably tried to culture all possible areas where they could find the source of mucormycosis infecting more of Indian hospitals and patients. And to a great surprise and to a great frustration, they were not able to even distinguish between the density of spores in a hospital versus in a kitchen or even outdoors under any tree or on a road. So those study data have consistently shown that the spore population of these Zygomyces species, which causes the family mucorales, the mucormycosis, is ubiquitous, as Sir has said. Also, the very fact they only could observe is that the density of spores in environment almost everywhere is almost 20 to 30 times more than in Western countries. So that probably does explain a little bit why India is having 80% of global cases in the world. And whenever it has, whether it is in ICU, renal transplants cases, even in non-COVID times, we still hold the record for 80% or maybe 2/3 per population of the patients. Now, why does it happen? As you said, we have this fungus which is in a spore form in the environment. Those spores are everywhere. They'll be in your nose also. They'll be in the mouth. Now, a moist nasal mucosa or an oral mucosa is still a good barrier for the fungus not to go in and cause havoc. But when you get it 2-3 environments, number one is a sugar-rich environment in a diabetic or in a person who has been induced into diabetes by giving steroids. Or I would assume also that India being a pre-diabetic population largely in the 30 plus age group, then you start having a risk group. And this risk group is quite big. In COVID, increases really massively in post-COVID patients. On top of that, we have these even fragile, intact mucosal bridges being damaged due to nasal cannulas, due to improper hygiene practices. A COVID patient really doesn't have good attendants in a hospital who can nurse him well. So these areas of breach allow these spores to get deposited inside the breached mucosa. And what does it do? These spores are supposed to be eaten up by macrophages, even if they do in an immunocompetent person with neutrophils coming in and all. But this signal is too delayed in an immunocompromised patient. And because of this, before the macrophages can even reach there or understand, they start germinating into hyphae. They start releasing the toxic lysozymes and hydrolases. And then suddenly you have the phenomena of arterial perineural spread into tissues. It starts to form these microthrombi. And then there's a rapid necrosis that starts from these areas, the dental area or the nasal area, into the nasal mucosa. It goes into the eye, starts destroying tissue and reaching up. Then you have these stages of eye involvement. And then if it goes in, which is we call this the stage 4, then you have the real intracranial possibility and the high possibility of death. So this is the way it normally the clinical pathogenesis picture goes in. The problem is that the first entry, the nose and the mouth entry, I wish it could be arrested at this time. Every clinician, every patient would like to do that because it is quite treatable. If you could just remove the scab and put the gels and a little bit of medication, or even just a simple removal. But the problem is that at this stage it is extremely difficult to diagnose. And by the time it gets diagnosed, it's usually in stage 3 or stage 4 sometimes. And because of that, we actually lose the battle quite frequently in COVID. But if you ask me about management, I'll do it later on.
That is still time. So what interestingly, what we learn over here, that the mode of transmission for the infection of the port of entry, be it for the COVID or be it for the even mucor, it is the same. It is from the nose and the oral cavity. That is the source of infection which enters into the body. So that is a very interesting point because for both these conditions, it is the same source. From the same port of entry where it enters into the body. So probably it also has to do with even some extent, maybe the individual care and individual hygiene, which will also play a very major role. Okay, I will come to Altamash.
That is the reason. So that is the reason why cerebral mucormycosis is much more common than other types of mucormycosis, because we have a fragile nasal and oral mucosa. The dermatologist would really concur that the skin is a much more resistant, organ to breach, and that is why. And even if the thing breaches, the keratin layer is so superb that it hardly allows the spores to germinate and get a sugar-rich environment so fast, but it does sometimes, as we can see.
Okay, so I will come to Altamash. So we learned from these speakers that they already started talking about the high blood sugar. So at least we know that diabetics is a high risk. So can you elaborate on what are the other risk factors which make them or predisposes an individual to get mucormycosis? Altamash.
Sure. Thank you for that very important question. I think for simplicity, mycosis is any fungal infection, and when it is caused by mucor or due to mucor, it's called mucormycosis. pre-COVID era, as you were talking, Dr. Ketan, earlier, BC and AC. So pre-COVID era, also we have seen mucormycosis from India. If you look at prevalence, it was around 0.0034 to 1.7 per million globally. But if you look at Indian data, it is around 0.14 per thousand, which means already the background rate of mucormycosis for our patients is 80 times more than them. Now, this translates into diabetes being one of the important risk factors. We are going to see really a large number of cases of mucormycosis. But what happens? Why is there a infection rise? So this is explained by three things. Either the organism is really strong, or we are doing something else so that the organism is getting strong. That's the virulence, which is either in the form of the uncontrolled diabetes, pre-existing diabetes, or steroid induced, which is either by patient self-medicated or steroid used for a long time. Or there is a diabetic ketoacidosis, and acidosis is a very good milieu, which is again a very good risk factor for this particular fungus to grow. Two more additions are the iron overload, which we know by ferritin it could be high, which is also possible because of decay and other mechanisms. And a query and a question mark is zinc more also can cause this? That's a matter of question. So this number one was the issues related to strong virus or a strong causative agent. Number two, weak host. How the weak is host? Because there is COVID inside the body, it is causing decrease in CD4, CD8, creating an HIV-like picture inside. There is immense lymphopenia that we see. There is decrease in phagocytosis, and again there is propensity to get more infections. And number three, conducive environment. Now, when we say conducive environment, there is either one, are we using something which is really unsterile? This dusty, damp walls, construction sites. After discharge, patients should not be going in or around these areas to prevent spore. I prevent the spore going in the nose or mouth or through the skin. And I agree with the previous speakers about that. Yes, the spores of this particular fungus are present all around. They're in our bread, in our fruits, they're in the soil, they're in the air, everywhere. It is only the breach. So taking all these things together, diabetes, if it is present, it is 7.5 times higher risk factor for somebody to get COVID. Now, if I tell you a current study, there was a meta-analysis from India which came last week, and there is one central study from Central India which came, and both of them have actually concluded that 80% of these people had diabetes. And one study from Central India spoke about that there are around 21% of people with mucor N in COVID who do not have diabetes. That's a question. That's a point to be noted. Number two, around 14% of these people were never on steroids. So again, that makes us to question, is it something beyond diabetes and steroid? Number three, 36% of these patients, those who got COVID-associated mucormycosis or CAM, which is an easier term to understand, 36% were under home isolation. So how did these people, those who were never exposed to oxygen cylinders or whatever the queries are coming because of humidifiers, how did they get? And also around 52% never received any oxygen, and yet they have got mucormycosis. So I think though diabetes is one of the most common, present in around 80 to 90% of the people, looking at both pre and post-COVID series, we have to yet find out other factors where we can generate more treatment point of view, generate more preventive point of view strategies. I'm sure you're going to ask me later how to prevent about this. I think till now, I agree with all the previous speakers about mucor, and diabetes is really one of the rampant and most important risk factor for CAM.
Okay, Altamas, you said very rightly. So diabetes is very, very major contributory factor. Superadded steroid therapy in this COVID time, which really makes all pre-diabetics who were not diagnosed for years, or they were never been knowing that sugars are borderline, and they really became frank diabetics during these periods. But as you rightly said, we have got still a sizable number of people who did not have diabetes or a pre-diabetes, who were not received steroids, not receive even oxygen. So you think there could be an immune dysfunction or immune dysregulation, as you mentioned, like how COVID behaves like an HIV state time.
Precisely.
Yeah. So is there also can be one of the major contributory factor?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely, I agree with this. There is some more immune dysfunction to what we had with the first strain, what we saw in the first wave, and now what we are seeing in the second wave. There is a definite increase in virulence of the pathogen, and there is definite markedly increase in infection and severity.
Correct. Because we definitely see there has been altered B cell and T cell functionality which has been observed and which results into the final immunity which gets hampered in the COVID, and that would make them predisposed to get the mucor so easily. Now, another important aspect which you mentioned about the dampening of the wall, and also what has been seen, the local authorities have taken a lot of closed offices, schools, and have used it as a COVID isolation centers where people have been kept, for because those who don't have a separate facility to stay in a separate room at home and all. So even that it can become a source of infection from there also, as you said
Yes.
rightly. So
Yes,
that is
precisely.
also one thing. In fact, there was one nice article which had come, which is stating about the healthcare associated mucormycosis in COVID time. So especially starting with giving the excess of steroids, starting with giving. Now, okay, now it comes to the another important aspect. What about immune dysregulation mechanism adjusting therapy? So like tocilizumab or omalizumab, which started using it. So do you think that also could have been contributory factor, Altamas?
Yes, so these immunomodulatory agents are contributory factors, but in both the case series that have been seen, there are certain cases who have never received tocilizumab, never received any immunomodulatory agents. Some patients never received steroid, and yet in them also we have seen. So I think it's more of a speculation that we need to do. Why is it that people without risk factors also are getting? And I think this was true even in the pre-COVID era, where people, those who didn't have diabetes, some of them did get it. So either is there a background hematologic malignancy or some other malignancy? For example, it could be an organ transplantation or some other disease. But yet we have seen in one of the data, you will be very surprised what I'm going to tell you the next line. In one series from central India, people aged less than 40 years were found to be having this COVID associated mucormycosis up to the tune of 15%. 15% out of 210 cases were less than 40 years who didn't have a lot of these risk factors. So that is what we have to question now, that how do we really look into the spread? How do we look into the pathogenesis of this particular organism? Of course, treatment part, I'm sure you want to take next.
Yeah, we'll come to that. So we understood about what is mucor, how does it spread, what are the risk factors. Now, Nikhilesh is with us here. Let us understand. So, Nikhilesh, what are the clinical presentations and what are the various types of mucor which we see in routine practice? Nikhilesh.
So most common has been, I'm thankful to media now and all the other people that they have actually, sort of advertised this wave in the form of a black fungus, because people have become more aware of the symptoms. So those patients who were coming to us slightly later have started coming to us now slightly earlier. Most of the times it is mainly some headache, mainly some eyeball pain, some nasal discharge, and a swelling over face, one side of the face. So most of the people have started coming to us with that. I would agree with the observations of the earlier panelists that what we're seeing is very different. What we're seeing is predominant affliction of mucormycosis in patients between 30 to 45 years of age group. What we are seeing is these are all either newly diagnosed diabetics, which we diagnose at this point in time, or they were never known to be diabetics earlier. So definitely an immune dysregulation. How we will be able to explain the difficult thing to say. Common symptoms again can be divided into something like eye related, something like face related, something like headache and other intracranial symptoms. What is really happening is most of the people that we are seeing now are coming to us with ocular symptoms, predominantly because ocular symptoms are noticed earlier by the patient. Somehow the swelling over the face or the cheek is missed so many times. But it is the ocular symptoms which, they are picked up immediately. People develop swelling over the eye, they develop pain, And then when they show themselves to an ophthalmologist diagnoses them to have some sort of a restriction of movement, especially of medial rectus, and then they get referred to the system. And they get referred, and when finally the imaging studies are done, mucormycosis is confirmed. So that is how we've been seeing it maybe. Intracranial extension cases, yes, they have come, but most of those cases are coming from peripheries. In fact, this has been an observation. Now, roughly around 250, 300 cases in Indore. What has been noted is that most of these, around 50 to 60% of these patients are coming from peripheral areas to Indore, because Indore was the biggest, sort of a referral center for these patients. But it is from peripheral areas that these people have come here.
Okay. So that is what you said about the presentation. So what we understand that commonest variety, what we see, which is predominantly rhino-ocular variety of mucor, which we see. So what are the different types of mucor which can be there? So for our delegates to understand the different types of presentation. So what you mentioned, the commonest is, of course, we understand is rhino-ocular type, but what are the other different varieties, Nikhilesh?
It can present in other places. Cutaneous mucormycosis was discussed earlier in the earlier portion of the meeting today. Then there's GI mucormycosis, which can be seen. And then there is trauma-related mucormycosis, which we see in contaminated wounds. But in context of COVID, probably it is the rhino-orbital, which is probably the commonest. And now I would put it that way, that now because there's significant awareness about this, it's more of rhino before it goes to the orbital that people have started coming to us. That's a good part because it becomes very treatable at that point.
Yeah. So the most worrisome is about the rhino-ocular variety, and of course, what we are always worried about then whenever there is an extension to cerebral mucormycosis, there is the one thing which is of course a more life-threatening and a dreaded complication, and then of course we require a combined team of people to manage these cases also. So now, as you mentioned about that, we are seeing this type of features. So have you seen anybody who is presenting with mucor and for the first time detected COVID, or is it always you have seen in a post-COVID state?
No, sir. It has happened vice versa as well. It has happened vice versa as well. That the patient has been diagnosed with mucormycosis, then you get their COVID study done, and then they turn out to be COVID RT-PCR positive. Some of them had absolutely no inkling of their symptoms. Some of them remained absolutely asymptomatic. They come to you with mucor. Their CTs will show you that their lungs are involved to the tune of 30 to 40%. And then when you go ahead and get a COVID RT-PCR done, it is positive. Some of these patients, COVID RT-PCR was not positive and their COVID antibody was positive. So what is happening is that it is also coming the other way around. So mucormycosis is happening in independent cause, rather than calling it post-COVID, I would call it more of a COVID-associated illness, rather than referring to it as a sequelae of COVID.
Okay, so can you now tell us, since you mentioned about the various presentations, so when we have got so many doctors who are managing COVID in the smaller cities and towns only, so what are red flag signs or symptoms which they should keep it in mind during COVID and post-COVID phase when they must strongly suspect mucor? So what will be those red flag signs and symptoms?
So patients would complain of teeth pain, which starts coming up suddenly. And secondly, these patients would be having swelling over the cheeks, either side. Third prominent symptom would be some amount of discharge and bleeding from the nose. I mean, these are symptoms that are caught on very easily by the relatives, because what really happens is, in this COVID era, because you have people who are working with PPEs, sometimes, and most of them would not be asking the patient to open their mouth and show that to them if there's any palatal lesion or anything of that sort. All those things are often missed. But definitely what is not missed is a swelling over the cheek. What is not missed is some amount of discharge or bleeding from the nose. What is not missed definitely by the patient is swelling over the eye. Most of the times it's unilateral. What is not missed is that patient starts complaining of visual symptoms, blurring of vision, some sort of loss of vision, and of course headache is there, a lot of headache. So these are the symptoms which come up.
Yes. So, as you said, these are certain red flag signs and symptoms which all of you, those who are treating COVID, should keep it in mind and be alert and should always look out for this, not only in a COVID or at the time of discharge, but it has to be continued in the post-COVID state also. I will come back to Dr. Reddy. Sir, you said about the cutaneous manifestation, or rather, I would say not specifically cutaneous mucor. So, during this COVID time, how are you seeing this cutaneous mucormycosis? Is it only the cutaneous, or it is a representation of other systemic mucormycosis?
Oh, as the during the COVID season, just before telling about the COVID and skin mucor, I want to say few things. There is an entity called primary cutaneous mucormycosis, wherein any disruption or any injury to the skin, these fungal spores can implant into the skin, and then it can produce what is known as primary cutaneous mucormycosis in a totally immunocompetent individual also. Need not be a diabetic, need not be on steroids. And in fact, we have seen one patient about 13 years back, a person from the rural area, after a fall when he was riding a bicycle, he just had a small laceration. After that, he developed a small ulcer, which then slowly it has progressed. And then when he came to us, we can see a nice, fine white mycelial growth on the ulcer. Subsequently, when we worked up that case, it turned out to be mucormycosis. And important about the mucormycosis is angioinvasion. That's very important feature. It invades the blood vessels, it causes infarction, and then causes necrosis, and that's how it spreads. So once this happens, sometimes it can, what is supposed to be a primary cutaneous mucormycosis can spread. It can become disseminated mucormycosis also. Apart from that, sometimes even in the inpatients, if there are various catheters and various these nasal prongs where the oxygen is being used, if it is not maintained properly, they're all the ideal sources for the implantation of the mucor spores. And there is a case report recently I read, a patient of diabetic who was giving injections into her insulin injection into the abdominal wall. She developed mucormycosis in the skin, the primary cutaneous mucormycosis. So, and regarding this COVID and cutaneous mucormycosis, I don't think we have seen many cases. It is mostly what we are seeing is rhino-orbitocerebral mucormycosis.
Okay, sir. So here you brought out one term, disseminated mucormycosis. So when do you use this term, disseminated mucormycosis?
No, if it involves more than one system. For example, disseminated mucormycosis is very common with pulmonary mucormycosis. From the lungs, it can spread to so many organs. It can spread to the brain, it can spread to the kidneys, it can spread to any organ. The very common focus of the primary focus of disseminated mucormycosis is the lung. That is pulmonary mucormycosis. That can become a disseminated mucormycosis.
Correct. So by that time, even the bloodstream has been invaded by the mucor, and then that is how we get that spread. So that is the one thing which carries a very high mortality. That is what has been observed over here.
Yeah.
Okay. So now what we understood that there is a strong clinical suspicion on the basis for diagnosis of mucor. I will come to Altamas again. So what are the common diagnostic modalities which are used, be it on a OPD basis or be it on an indoor basis? What are the common modalities which is used?
Right. So I think a very specific test that you would want to do in the first part is the KOH or the potassium hydroxide stain, which is to be done. It is to be deep nasally. And it was preferable if there is a discharge from the nose, either black or bloody or thick crusts are seen, then a nasal endoscope done by our ENT colleagues and take a specimen, biopsy specimen properly from, and then go for the stain of KOH. And also there are other varieties of tests, but this is one which is basic. Although culture comes a little later, it is advisable to send for culture. If there is a confusion in kappa and CAM, aspergillosis versus mucormycosis, then you can send galactomannan or the beta or BG test which would differentiate between the two. And apart from this, of course, the serum markers remain the same for a high condition of diabetes or an uncontrolled diabetes. And also, if there is a headache or a strong suspicion, and a gadolinium enhanced MRI would turn black in whichever sinus or whichever areas mucor is growing, because the necrosed tissues won't show up the scan, won't show up the dye, and it will look black on that particular side. So these are those important tests that one needs to be looking. And I think we don't have to get scared, because this is not contagious. This is one thing. It is present, ubiquitous. It is present everywhere. So neither doctor nor nurse nor any attendant should be worried about looking at the visual swelling and the way that we are seeing photos. So very high suspicion. And it is also said that if you are seeing a suspicious mucor lesion outside, it's the day 6 which will decide mortality or not. So if you're suspicious, start the treatment immediately, as is being told that it is a medical as well as a surgical emergency. So we take it in that order.
Yeah. Okay. So you said about the nasal endoscopy and sinuscopy. So we'll come to our ENT friend, because they said they need to be involved with that. And now suddenly in this COVID time with mucor, all ENT surgeons have become extremely busy, which is it. So I will come to Dr. Manish. So now how do you tackle this issue? Somebody who has got now COVID is not even discharged from it. He's still not sure his RT-PCR is negative or not. And then how do you go about it? If you have to confirm it, do you go for a sinus endoscopy, or how do you proceed in such scenario?
Well, first of all, I think the whole, in my opinion, and there'll be many debates on that, there has to be a total rethink on how we have to manage COVID after 3 weeks of COVID diagnosis or infection. We all have been talking about the fact that the viremia phase does not last more than 8 to 10 days. And after that, the person is practically not infective for others, even if, he's having a RT-PCR test positive, which in this wave somehow has been going on and on positive in so many people, as you all clinicians must be saying. So even if you stretch that principle up to 3 weeks, 3.5 weeks, that is the time when we are getting these COVID patients. And we should not, as ENT surgeons or as clinicians, worry too much about the COVID status of the patient. So as a principle, right from the day one, we have at least tried to be as invasive as possible in diagnosing these. MRIs are, of course, great. CT scans, MRI even more in diagnosing these suspicious lesions somewhere, but they are only suggestive pointers. There is no substitute for a nose examination, no substitute for a nasal endoscopy, and no substitute for a simple KOH smear for fungal examination and also fungal culture if possible. We have, at least in our hospital, a very, very urgent kind of a setup in which the patient, if he's coming through the outpatient department, as soon as the clinical suspicion sets in, he is subjected to an endoscopy in the minor room, which is next to the OPD. And these patients surprisingly do not need too much of anesthesia, also topical, because the mucor makes the nasal mucosa quite insensitive. And the biopsy is done without any topical anesthesia, even at most of the times. You take the smear, the microbiologist takes about 10 minutes to look it under a slide and tell you whether they are aseptic branching hyphae, which are scanty, or they are different type of hyphae which are branching and straight, and they could be aspergillus or whatever, or if it may not be mucor. But this is the time to do it most urgently, and we try to do that. At the same time, it does allow us a lot to know whether this disease is traveling upwards into the brain and the eye, or is traveling down towards the palate, because that's the entire different two ways of treating these patients. One is giving you the time to treat, and the other is not giving you too much of time. That's the time to do the staging of the disease into 1, 2, 3, 4. And so really the choice of putting a patient for an urgent surgery comes from that. Of course, the MRI takes place immediately after that, if possible, or if the patient has already done it. It's a very useful technique because, immediately do you have any bulk disease inside, which is pressing over the sinuses into the eyes, going towards the brain. And that is where the surgical debridement takes place, precedence even over the medical management as a first line. The removal of dead necrotic tissue as early as possible from these areas would be extremely helpful in treating any stage of the patient if he has bulk disease. And if we do that and then we start antifungal, or if there is any lag, then we can start antifungal therapy. This is the best combination that you can give to such patients. And that's what we are trying to do.
Okay. Good. Now you mentioned about staging of the disease. I will come to Nikhilesh. So Nikhilesh, now
Yes.
you have been seeing so many patients in critical care, and so what is this staging is all about, and do you involve ophthalmologist in every case, or how do you see on the imaging whether there is an involvement? So what do you, or when you refer to an ENT, will it be only ENT, or will there be an involvement of facial-maxillary surgeon along with ophthalmologist? How do you go in your institute?
Okay. So what we are doing is, the moment the suspected patient comes to us, they have put in place something called as a combi scan. And what this combi scan does is that this combi scan, what we really do is we do a MRI brain with orbit and a CT scan PNS with contrast. This is taken up on an urgent basis. Once this is done, the reports are informed. There's a simultaneous reference to physician intensivist, or then an ophthalmologist, an ENT surgeon, and depending on the findings, a fourth individual, that is a neurologist, is involved at times. Because certain of these patients may even have cavernous sinus thrombosis. Some of these patients may even have, bigger neurological manifestations. SOS, like what is really happens in this is that, just to go on a case in question, what had happened with us was that there was one case in which imaging-wise, we felt we should suspect mucor. And what was happening was that it was showing some sinus collection. Usually on MRI, it shows up as a T2 hypointensity. And what happened was that twice the surgeons came, endoscopy was done twice, but because the disease had not reached further and it was confined to sinus, they were not able to see it. And then we decided to go ahead with our suspicion to prove it that whether, they went ahead and sort of cleaned the sinuses, and then a diagnosis of mucormycosis was confirmed. Certain of these cases for diagnosing, we have started doing a frozen section straight away after FS. So that helps us. Drug therapy is started. If the patient gets admitted late in the evening, then the drug therapy started in the evening, and next day morning the patient is taken up for surgery. In most of the cases, if the decision is deemed urgent enough, then these patients are wheeled into the OT, maybe in somewhere between 3 to 5 hours once they get admitted. Their pre-op profiles and everything gets done. Their initial workup gets done, and then they're taken up for surgery by the ENT surgeon. So it's like basically a teamwork which goes through. And the patient is seen at least by 3 to 4 of them at various times. The ophthalmology review is also there. These reviews also happen in terms of MRI. We do a MRI brain plus orbit as a follow-up MRI after the procedures, something between 7 to 9 days of the initial procedure. Or if we see any new neurological manifestation, then these are done earlier. Most of the times, that's how the sequence goes.
Okay. So what we got it that irrespective of whichever stage you are diagnosing, whenever you are suspecting mucor, obviously Manish comes first on the forefront because it is the surgical debridement which forms the forefront of it, right? And as Manish has said, that debridement and extensive debridement. So Manish, will it also sometimes you may be getting mutilated quite, that way you have to go for extensive debridement. It may be quite mutilating features which you might be seeing after that, right? So is it also a common finding?
It's the most depressing phase of my career. I can tell you, in spite of being a bit in the limelight, it is something I would not like to be in my life again if given a chance. And that's exactly because of the fact that somebody who has been in the huge bottomless pit of a COVID infection, a moderate to severe COVID infection, brought back to life by his clinical protectors, the doctors, his family, put almost everything that they had into that treatment. And suddenly, after 3 weeks, is just imagine the plight of a patient, of a 35, 36-year-old man, breadwinner earner of the family, who's losing eyesight, just to be told that now you will require another 15, 20 days in the hospital, maybe lose your life, and definitely some part of your recognition, that is your face. It could be a palate, it could be a eye. And not only that, the medicines are so prohibitively expensive. It's 3 to 4 times than what would have costed him during the COVID treatment. It brings tears in our eyes as well when we see such situations. But what can you do? The only thing is that you can just keep on working hard at the fact that you should not lose these patients. And thankfully, although our classical textbook mortality statuses of mucormycosis defines as a mortality rate between 50 to 80%. Whereas we thankfully, and I don't know why Gujarat and Maharashtra colleagues, what their mortality statuses are, but thankfully they are very competent. I know all of us, we've been able to maintain a mortality rate of around 15%, maybe sometimes 18, something like that in our hospital. Since the data thing is going on. So 15, that's the only solace, that in spite of everything, we are able to, and probably that's because of these fantastic diagnostic techniques, the awareness that has stepped in, the MRIs, the nasal endoscopies, the collaboration of the ENT, eye, the intensivist, more knowledge with the endocrinologist, knowing the causes. It has definitely helped, but it's still a very sad story.
You said the thing absolute rightly. In fact, Maharashtra, we have seen the statistics wise, the mortality rate in mucor is less than 10%.
Okay.
So that is what the situation is right now.
Yeah.
I will come to Dr. Altamas. So
I probably, it is as a state, if I say the North Indian state or Delhi, it would be lesser. But because I'm in a peripheral hospital where I'm referred cases who have already lost the battle too much, so we get these cases on where I just see them, and in half an hour they are on their way to the ICU. So I had 4 such cases of stroke setting in before I could even touch them. So those kind of brainstem infarcts, 4 or 5 cases, just without even touching the scalpel on them, they went into that. So we are getting these kind of cases at the hospital too.
Okay. So now, of course, we have done the surgery, and of course, we will come to antifungal. But before coming to antifungal, we need to manage the metabolic milieu properly. And there we have a role of Altamas. So he's been asked to see the patient, and patient is just recovering from cytokine storm, now has been diagnosed to have mucor. He has got uncontrolled diabetes. He is on a high dose steroids. How are you going to tackle this? Now you have been told that he has got a mucor suspected. So Altamas, your approach.
Thank you so much for that intense question. I think the first thing is get off the steroid as early as possible, because in how much ever severe the infection is, 5 to 10 days of steroids are nearly sufficient to control the COVID cytokine storm. Number 2, get off the immunomodulatory drugs as quick as possible. And number 3, insulin is a drug to be used in this kind of emergencies. And do not hesitate to increase the dose of insulin, because some patients may require up to 10 to 15, 25 to 30 units per hour, as high as that. And do not worry to scale up. I think that would give a very good environment even for the surgeon once the glucose is controlled. And I think other parameters also would be taken care. Now, also we have to see that the renal parameters are normal, with patient doesn't land up in hypoglycemia, and also provide an environment for the antifungals that would come into play. Some patients, at least in 2 series, 15%, and in 1 series, 13% of patients have been found to be in DK at the time of presentation. I concur with the feeling of Dr. Munjal, whatever he said, because these are those DK acidotic patients who end up with stroke and infarcts, because this fungus is angioinvasive. So giving treatment with fluids, giving treatment of electrolytes, giving treatment with insulin, no matter what is the high scale of the dose, and that is how we would come to a control of the metabolic milieu. And also do a baseline calcium, baseline magnesium, baseline sodium, potassium, because we are going to start these patients on amphotericin B, whether it's liposomal or non-liposomal, and they are very notorious to cause these electrolyte imbalances and rises in creatinine.
Okay. Thank you, Altamas. Now, of course, surgical debridement, metabolic milieu taken care of, but now we have to come back to specific antifungal. And let's hear from Nikhilesh. So, Nikhilesh, now how do we go about the antifungal therapy for such patients?
Sir, the drug of choice for mucorales is actually liposomal amphotericin B. Now, the only problem is that because of the sheer magnitude of cases and the sort of cases that we are seeing, the availability of liposomal amphotericin B has started coming into question.
Nikhilesh, you are not audible properly.
Am I audible, sir?
Now, little better.
Okay, so what has happened is that actually the drug of choice remains liposomal amphotericin. But the problem that is happening is with the availability of the drugs. Because of the sheer number of cases and the sort of magnitude of mucormycosis that we are facing, the availability of liposomal amphotericin B has sort of availability issues have sort of forced us onto back foot. The sort of dose that we use in terms of liposomal amphotericin B, if the patient is not having an intracranial complication or intracranial spread, or if the patient is not a patient of solid organ transplant, these are the only two categories we are talking about. So if the patient is having intracranial spread or the patient is of a solid organ transplant, developing mucormycosis, the sort of dose that we need to use for liposomal amphotericin B is ideally 8 to 10, or at least more than 7.5 milligram per kg per day. That is what is recommended in the literature. 8 to 10 would be easier to calculate. So 8 to 10 milligram per kg per day is what we are talking about. However, if it is confined to sinus, then even a dose of 5 milligram per kg per day should be good enough. Having said that, how long do you continue it? Ideal would be to continue it for at least 4 to 6 weeks, do serial imagings, and it is only on imagings and subsequent endoscopies, if required SOS, that we confirm that the patient has become disease-free. That is one thing. If not, if liposomal amphotericin B is not available, then what? That becomes a major question. So then what means probably the only drug that has been tested in a wide fashion in terms of order of priority would be posaconazole tablets. Because what really happens is, again, posaconazole tablets, if you're going to give, the dose required would be first day 300 mg morning and evening, and second day onwards 300 mg once daily. That is what is recommended. It has to be given mandatorily with something fatty. You can ask the patient to take it with some form of butter, ghee, or cheese, so that the absorption is good for that particular tablet. As a third option, which is relatively lower down the rung, would be something like posaconazole syrup, which can be given in the form of 200 mg 4 times a day. That comes out to around 5 ml in most of the formulations. Again, meant to be given with either butter or cheese. Now, can we use other forms of amphotericin B? That becomes a major question. You can go ahead and use lyophilized, but the problem is that if the disease is going to the brain, then probably none of these other formulations of liposomal amphotericin B are going to work, because none of them have been proven to be of any benefit with intracranial spread. One. Secondly, any other combinations that will work? There are 5 papers on combinations. When we talk in terms of combinations, different papers. The combinations that have been known to work are liposomal amphotericin B with posaconazole. That is number 1. Second one would be a caspofungin with posaconazole. Second one. And third one would be a caspofungin with isavuconazole. Now, isavuconazole is a relatively newer drug of the block. Very few interactions, less problems of liver and renal involvement. But again, very expensive, and again, no CNS penetration. And the index trial that was done for it, vital trial, the problem with that is that it compared it with a different formulation of amphotericin. So how good will that be? Well, I'll keep my fingers crossed. We'll use it in some patients, but let's see them on long-term follow-up before commenting anything definitive. So itraconazole, some in vitro activity, but as of now, no recommendations as yet in terms of dosage and in terms of the sort of duration that we are supposed to give it for. And another thing is itraconazole, if it is used as a prophylaxis, can give rise to breakthrough mucorrhizal infections. That has also been documented. The same is probably true when you use posaconazole, because whenever we use posaconazole, say maybe 3 months, 4 months down the line, you can see certain breakthrough infections. And at that point in time, you either will need to do something different in terms of changing your therapeutic regimen or planning a new surgical intervention, or anyway, like you look at it. So this is the sort of thing that's come forward. And this is from the latest guidelines, 2019, 2020 recent articles they published in Lancet. I think after this epidemic of mucormycosis, we would be in a position to probably highlight our own experience and probably give our set of guidelines to the world. I'll put it that way. The numbers are so huge.
Right. So you said it rightly, and even ICMR has come out with the guidelines of mucormycosis in COVID time. And obviously, where lyophilized amphotericin B has been stressed upon, which has really created so much shortage across the country. In fact, there was a news like, the grey marketing has suddenly started for this lyophilized amphotericin B, what used to happen with other antiviral drugs which happened in the past. Now, what has happened is now each state has come out with their own guidelines. In fact, I was surprised to see that Jharkhand was the first state to give all its patients mucormycosis lyophilized amphotericin B free of cost. And that was the one thing which was, really a good news which came, and subsequently a couple of other states came out that they will start providing free of cost. In fact, now Delhi, I'm sure Manish will endorse that, has got the release of this lyophilized amphotericin B under the government control, and it is only with the supervision and the prescription it is given to individual patients. So like what had happened to remdesivir, which was released for individual prescription, that has happened also. So probably because of this single utility agent, which is lyophilized amphotericin B, it has come into the so much short supply. I would come to Dr. Reddy. Sir, what about in cutaneous mucor? Is there anything different in that over there? Because whenever I see the dermatologists are always going for the topical applications and all. So for cutaneous mucor, is there anything different therapy?
Yeah. No, before answering your question, I wanted to say a few things about the mycological aspect of this mucor. Actually, there are two broad categories of zygomycetes. One is mucorales, second is entomophthalales. Under mucorales, we get mucormycosis, the commonest species, Rhizopus. And the second entomophthalomycosis, we have two types of fungus called Conidiobolus and Basidiobolus. This Conidiobolus and Basidiobolus mycosis, it causes subcutaneous swellings. It causes a condition called subcutaneous phycomycosis. This is a very, very chronic condition. It won't disseminate so fast like this rhinocerebral mucormycosis. It's a very slow growing soft tissue swellings. In this particular situation, there is a role for itraconazole. The chronic type of mucormycosis, this particular type called subcutaneous phycomycosis. This particular condition, there is a role for itraconazole. Whereas that topical, absolutely there is no role. Topical cream in the form of amphotericin cream or anything, absolutely no, there is no role. If you try to apply this amphotericin cream on the face with this rhinocerebral mucormycosis, what weight is going to help? The skin is completely necrotic. It won't even 0.5% also will not be absorbed. When there is IV preparation itself is having so many problems under the necrotic tissue, where is the role for topical amphotericin? Absolutely, there is no role. As long as itraconazole is concerned, there is only one type of report came from China in an agricultural person. He developed this fungus particular infection. It's again, I think it is what I have mentioned as subcutaneous phycomycosis. For that patient, they have given itraconazole for about 6 months, resulting in a cure of that particular condition. Other than that, I think this mucormycosis caused by Mucorales family, there is no indication for itraconazole. Only amphotericin, as the earlier speaker said, posaconazole and isavuconazole. That's all.
Correct. So, of course, those are few anecdotal reports which are there. But besides that, what we understand still, it's a lyophilized amphotericin B, which remains the mainstay of therapy. Okay, I will come to Manish and ask. Now, it has been lot of been talked about HBOT, hyperbaric oxygen therapy. So, what is the role of HBOT in mucor?
Well, we haven't frankly tried it. It is supposed to be of great help in any gangrene cases for tissue revascularization. But as we can see, this is a active mycotic spreading very fast infection. And frankly, the kind of patients we have, to imagine them being sent for hyperbaric therapy into chambers and then expecting some results would be too early. However, there is still some point in that, but that once these patients actually recover with a lot of necrotic tissue, maybe which is not harboring the infection anymore, and they are in a relatively safe zone of life, we can subject them to a little bit of hyperbaric oxygen therapy for better tissue regeneration and spread of necrosis, which could be non-mycotic in spread, like due to the gangrene spreading. So, but in active mycotic infection, I do not see any role of this hyperbaric oxygen providing any relief in a person who's struggling for life, and you just send him to this thing. We haven't tried this.
Right. So, what we learned that this dreaded disease can be tackled very well if it is diagnosed early and treated. That's very much important. And at the same time, we understood that the therapy is so expensive, and also, the access to the therapy also may not be easy. So prevention remains the best treatment. And we have seen that there are so many iatrogenic factors which could have contributed for these conditions. And that reminds me the quote from Sir William Osler, the father of modern medicine. He has given a very beautiful quote that it is the first duties of the physician is to educate the masses not to take medicine. Now we start wondering, he being a father of modern medicine, and he states that we should educate that people should not take medicine. But then he clarified the subsequent statement is because the person who takes medicine has to recover twice, once from the disease and once from the medicine, and which is so much true when we see in the COVID era. So now let's come to Altamas. So Altamas, what would be the best preventive strategies which you feel, somebody who has been diagnosed with COVID? So I think prevention is better than cure. So what are the best preventive measures which can be taken so that we can avoid or we can pick it up early for mucor? Altamas.
Thank you for that very important question. So prevention of mucormycosis should be number one, no self-medication, whether it is steroid, whether it is vitamin, or whether it is antibiotic. No patient should be taking any self-medication and no prolonged doses. Number two is self-monitoring of diabetes and report to your doctor if sugars are more than 180 milligram. That should be the range, I think, where they should be alarmed that my glucose is really uncontrolled. Number three is self-hygiene or personal hygiene. Maybe we can advise them to have a new brush post-discharge. They can brush twice. We can advise them to keep the nose and the mouth clean. We can advise them to keep the nasal and the oral mucosa moist by saline spray or by betadine sprays. Then we can also tell them once the patient is discharged for prevention that patient should not be placed in a dusty or a damp wall room. The surrounding should be clean as we keep it clean in the hospital. If there is a home use of oxygen, use a proper sterile water for humidifier. Then if gardening or farming is really very important, they should be having a self-protection with long sleeve shirt, pant, gloves, and shoes, and do not touch the moss or the manure or the soil directly to prevent mucormycosis. know the warning signs and symptoms. Very importantly, they should know about face, whether there is a pain, discoloration, numbness or swelling, any eye pain or eye swelling, any headache or numbness, any toothache or tooth loosening, nasal block or nasal discharge, they should know. And they should also know that discharge should be either black or bloody, and they should not worry. I think one important thing that we should also use for prevention of mucormycosis is do not use repeatedly unwashed mask, which could also be one of the predisposing factors. And I think by doing this, we will definitely reduce the incidence and prevalence of mucormycosis both. Thank you, Doctor.
Yeah, thank you, Altamas. That was a brief preventive outlook completely, which you have given in a nutshell, which is so good. And I think prevention is the key factor. Friends, we have covered most of the subjects over here. Now we have a very quick questions coming up. In fact, we have been bombarded with the questions from the delegates because I'm sure that's the hot topic nowadays. So let's tackle the most of the questions which we have already covered. We will not take that. I will come to Nikhilesh. There is a question that how industrial oxygen has contributed to mucormycosis, because we have seen of late there is the government strategy because there was a shortage of oxygen and the industrial oxygen which was used. So do you think it has contributed in increased incidence of mucor?
So till now, there is no direct evidence to link the both. I did that. Till now, there is no direct evidence.
Okay. And more question is, what are your observations on presentation and management of mucor in pregnancy or lactating mother post-COVID? Have you come across any cases in pregnancy or lactating?
No, sir, not yet. I haven't come across or a lactating mother.
Manish, you're in pregnancy or lactating woman. You're muted. You will have to unmute. You're muted.
Well, I do not have any lady. I do have young ladies who are married and who got mucormycosis. Frankly, an ENT surgeon's questioning is a little bit limited, and I should have asked them whether they could be pregnant at the same time or lactating. I have to take this questionnaire back now. I did not recognize that. Frankly, I'll be very honest.
No, I really completely understand, because this is going to be a very, very critical situation when somebody, pregnant lady getting mucor, and we are going to be in a big, so because obviously we will be tied up in terms of therapies. Obviously, surgery would be one thing which you still can offer it, but then about the antifungal therapy, we would be totally tied up in this area. Okay, I will come to Altamas. Question is, what can we do in mucormycosis at rural area to diagnose? Because apparently where they would not have access to a sinus endoscopy or going for the maybe even imaging. So what do you suggest in such cases? Altamas.
So I think as the disease itself is based on a high suspicion, so even if it's in a rural area or otherwise in whichever, even in a tertiary area, I think the first is to get the metabolic part control immediately. 2 is arrange for a KOH, and if imaging is not available, then number 3, arrange for at least the deoxycholate AMB till we have some amount of help coming in. These are the 3 important steps that we could use for a rural area, importantly.
Okay. Nikhilesh, another question is this fungal infection related with excess use of antibiotics? Is there excessive use of antibiotics? Because we have seen the antibiotics which have been used left, right, and center. And I'm extremely sorry to say that, that is the standard protocol in all the majority of hospitals, be it in metro cities or otherwise, the ones, even if it is a COVID pneumonia, in the indiscriminated use of antibiotics, which you would agree. So you think, is that also contributory factor?
That is true. It seems like, there's a fungal super infection over a bacterial infection. Or rather, let me put it differently. It looks like a viral super infection or a bacterial infection, the way our prescription practices are. So that is true. That is one of the predisposing factors, very well-known predisposing factors to predispose to fungus, and it has already been implicated in spread of non-albicans candida albicans. So I wouldn't be surprised if that would be acting as a factor, because definitely, yes, it suppresses the normal flora and changes the basic milieu. So, very broad spectrum, unregulated antibiotic prescription, definitely, yes. But probably as in the same vein that you spoke with Dr. Altamash, now we have started making it prominent on our home isolation prescriptions and in our discharge prescriptions. We are, making a brief mention of the symptoms of mucormycosis and telling the patient to report back to us immediately if they have it. So that is some sort of sensitization that they are supposed to come back. We don't ask them to act, but we just tell them, you have it, you come back to us, we'll diagnose and then we'll take you in if it is proven.
Okay, thank you. I'll come to Altama's question.
Yes.
Kindly explain, as there were no cases of mucor reported during first COVID-19 wave. So could it be because of the use of hydroxychloroquine at that time? Of course, we all have used left, right, and center, even for prophylaxis, preventive measures, and even for therapeutic measures. So what is, since the pattern has changed during this second wave, so what could be the reason?
Yeah, I think very, very important question. I would just like to add the previous answer. There are two studies which say that COVID patients were on 100% antibiotics, all the ones who got mucormycosis. So there is definitely an element of superinfection. But in these two studies, one was from Italy, they showed that it was 70% was a bacterial infection and fungal infection in that series was only 6%. So there is something else also, I think, in our population, our country, in this side that we are looking for beyond antibiotics also. Coming back to hydroxychloroquine, as we discussed steroid, we discussed diabetes, we discussed tocilizumab. Similarly, there are drugs and the list would go on. It is only speculation, Dr. Mehta. I think right now we won't be able to come to a conclusion at all. In this pandemic time, I think in this is a time to act, prevent as much as possible, keep on collecting data. I think I would urge people across the country, across the specialities, please, as much as possible, report the cases and then we take it from there. And let the meta-analyses and reviews find out about which drug could be more speculative. But right now we cannot point out towards only one drug because of the evidence that steroids, which are implicated across the world, in one series, 20% of the patients were not on steroid. In one series, 15% of the patients were not on steroids at all. So we really cannot talk about any one drug causing this. Thank you.
Yes, so that is also very important thing. Now, of course, partly we have covered this question about what measures to follow if someone living with us is diagnosed mucormycosis. So, Altamash, you can take that question.
I think I did tell you the 10 points on prevention. Do you want me to repeat those 10 points?
No, absolutely. So that is what, in fact, what message we want to give it, that if somebody, first of all, if he is diagnosed with mucormycosis, he would not be living at home. He would be definitely in a hospital setting. So there is no question of coming that question, because obviously mucormycosis is one thing which we are not going to treat on a OPD basis. It is going to, patient needs to be hospitalized. So be it patient is in continuity of the COVID hospitalization and then diagnosed, or even if he has been discharged post-COVID, he can get this, but he needs to be hospitalized. So that is one point I think all of us are agreeing to it, that is definitely a very crucial point. Okay, there is another question. Is there any role of prophylactic antifungal in COVID patients who are on high-dose steroids? Nikhilesh.
Didn't get that question, sir. Once a minute.
Is there any role of prophylactic antifungal in COVID patients, those who are on high dose of steroids? Like how we give for a patients of HIV, those who are severely immunocompromised with low CD4, we give a antifungal prophylactic. So is there any role of antifungal in COVID?
I'm not sure, sir. There's no prophylactic role that has been described other than a neutropenic category. So very difficult to say that whether there's a prophylactic role. That is one thing. Currently, no evidence. Again, this is what it is. And having said that, like I told you, one of the drugs, itraconazole, if you give it as prophylaxis, there is a very good chance that a patient may have a breakthrough mucorales infection because of that. That is what the literature says. So it becomes very difficult. But as of now, there's no recommendation for a prophylaxis in these patients. However, we've been mulling over the thought that maybe if ICU patients or the stay of the patients is prolonged, probably doing a nasal endoscopy before discharge may be a good idea before sending them, just to ensure we catch these early.
Yeah, Dr. Reddy wants to add something.
Absolutely, I think it is not worth going for a prophylactic antibiotics because any antifungal drugs, for example, itraconazole or voriconazole, for that matter, or other echinocandins like capsofungin and micafungin, and all these things, they will suppress this particular type of species. At the end, patient end up developing mucormycosis.
Okay. So that's again a very important point. Okay. Another question: how serum ferritin is associated with incidence of mucor? Any correlation? Altamas.
I think we covered it in my first question.
Absolutely.
About increase in serum iron because of this mucormycosis. It actually grows on the iron-rich component, and also in decay there can be increase in ferritin. Two, and number three, COVID itself and in cytokine storm, the ferritin is released in the body, and that is how all the three things together increase this ferritin. Now, I think about the prophylaxis, European guideline talks only about in hematologic malignancies to give posaconazole, but no prophylaxis of any antifungal in COVID-associated mucormycosis. I think that is a very important message that at the moment, as of today, we have around 9,000 cases of mucor in our country, and there is no role of any antifungal for prophylaxis as on today. Thank you.
Okay. Now, again, in your point, what you mentioned. Now, let's go in other way. We talked about ferritin and the mucor. So, does this mean that somebody who has got on discharge still very high serum ferritin level, is he at a higher risk of getting a mucor? Can this be interpreted?
COVID itself, uncontrolled diabetes, any prolonged use, stay in ICU for more than 3 weeks, total stay more than 3 weeks. All these are actually risk factors, and every patient with cytokine storm may not have a high ferritin, and not high ferritin would develop into COVID. So I think it's an overall thing and not just one figure or one number. So we have to look at it in a whole, on a whole as a patient.
Okay, so that's the very crucial point. So probably there are a lot of factors which are conglomerated and playing a vital role also. Now here, Altamas, I would still want to know, since steroids which you are talking about, do you think any particular steroid has got a high propensity for the infection for mucor, or is it the same for all the steroids? Altamas? Okay, Nikhilesh can take that.
Sir, as of now, I have not come across any data or literature supporting that, whether it is DEXA or methylprednisolone or hydrocortisone, there's any one steroid which has got a higher propensity to cause mucor. So I have not come across that literature at all.
But all our panelists agree that the excessive indiscriminated usage of steroids. In fact, we have seen the people have used methylprednisolone 1 gram daily for a couple of days. And it has continued. And people think patient is hypoxic. Let's continue steroids. Let's give it. But if the parenchyma which has been destroyed, damaged even by increasing steroids, sometimes it's not going to work, and then we are ending up with such issues which are there. I will come to Altamas. Are you there?
Calling you out.
Who's calling?
He's calling you question here.
Okay, so tell Altamas, is there any role of adjuvant therapies like aspirin and statins in mucor? So Altamas, any role of aspirin on statins? Because there has been data. In fact, one of the very nice paper which has found that the diabetic patients who are on statins have got a relatively protective effect from mucor. So if, of course, we are going to continue with them on whatever ongoing therapy, but is there any role those who are not on? Do we prescribe aspirin or statin in these patients?
So I think that's a very important question, again related to diabetes and lipids. So there is one study from the US which talks about diabetes patient when they were given statin after the tornado which came, and they were exposed to the flood water, they were exposed to again wet wall, damp surroundings, and when they found out that it was the statin which had some protective role over there. And I think as patients of diabetes, there should not be a problem to put people at least of more than 40 years on statin, or a documented dyslipidemia on a statin, and they would not do a harm in this particular thing. Of course, yes, aspirin should be used as a kind of prophylaxis. We have been using at least for 3 to 4 weeks as a COVID prophylaxis post discharge, whether it's rivaroxaban, dabigatran, or whether it is apixaban. And in certain patients, then we change it to aspirin. So I think we would use this drug, but these are only adjunct. There is no foolproof thing that they would actually stop, or they would halt the progress, or they will help. There are no outcome data. There are no outcome studies with statin.
Right. So that is one. And one more question is, what about if the patient has got renal insufficiency, about antifungal? So I would come to Nikhilesh.
Sir, let's look at it. We dose modify the drug. With conventional ampho-B, we dose modify the drug. Liposomal amphotericin B, there are plenty of variations. While the literature now more or less defends, stating that probably there's little or no nephrotoxicity that happens. But there are different ways of giving it. And liposomal amphotericin B, when we give it, definitely 10 milligram per kg. We've given it in 2 or 3 of those patients who had a temporal abscess. It's a huge whopping dose, and they sort of, their creatinine levels went up. But most of the data that supports, it says 2 things. One, you have to stop all the other concurrent nephrotoxic drugs which are there. That has to be stopped. And secondly, even then, if you see a rise in creatinine, you have to dose modify your liposomal amphotericin B as well, if that is the case. Roughly what it translates into is, if the creatinine levels go up, if the creatinine levels double, then your amphotericin B levels, dose comes down by half. That's what is practiced most of the times. And then once, like you can keep on doing your creatinine and potassium levels on a daily basis, and then you keep on dose modifying accordingly till a normal level creatinine is reached. Once normal level creatinine is reached, you go back to your full dose. So that's how they do it.
Okay, so I think we have covered most of the questions, and we have heard all the faculties, which has given a fantastic viewpoint on this. So now let's, before we conclude, I want each faculty to say 2 lines pertaining to their specialty. And I would start with Dr. Manish Munjal, especially for our delegates, concluding 2 lines to their specialty. Manish.
Well, number one is that if there is a clinical suspicion, even at home, if you have been finding that one of your cheeks is feeling different from the other cheek for a prolonged period of time, let's say a few hours, if you are having a numbness in your tooth, if you are having a scalding or a crust in your nose, or as the delegates were mentioning about other symptoms like eye swelling, redness, cheek pain, there should be no delay absolutely whatsoever to rush to a physical appointment with a ENT or a eye or a neurologist, whoever it may be, for a examination. The patient should be really be seen with a high index of suspicion. As our intensivist colleague pointed out, there are many things that can be missed even on a nose examination in early patients. And on suspicion, there should be a definite imaging done. These are the protocols that have to be made. There is an absolute acute shortage of liposomal amphotericin in the market. It is almost not there. In spite of government control, we are facing the problem. So as a surgeon, the responsibility cannot be shed. It further increases. We are doing debridements with a wider intent, wider area, and that is probably going to help more when the medicine is short. Even having said so, we are falling back onto other alternative medicines like posaconazole, but as a therapeutic dosage mentioned in some literatures, we are giving doses of around 800 milligram tablets every day in 2 divided doses to adult patients. That much high posaconazole we have been advised to give through some literature. There is absolutely no role for other antifungals except this isobuconazole, which has been shown some promise in studies, but it is exorbitantly expensive. So posaconazole, thankfully, is still present. There has to be a great coordination between your eye, ENT, and your critical care medicine colleagues, endocrinologists, because ultimately surgery, no surgery, with surgery, patient has to be be treated at the molecular level, his serum levels corrected, sugar and return of immunocompetence should be as fast as possible. So that is my gist for the entire thing.
Manish, your gist included everybody's gist. You covered everything. So probably once the patient comes, we will not be able to, we'll have to refer to any of them. You are a fantastic, as a good overall clinician. So Dr. Reddy, your final concluding 1 or 2 lines?
Yeah, I think Dr. Munjal has covered, as you said rightly. I think there is no role for anti-fungal prophylaxis. Better always avoid that. And then no self-medication. And then any red signals, don't take it lightly. Immediately attend to the doctor, consult the doctor, and take the opinion and act accordingly.
Thank you. Dr. Altamas?
Yes. So I think tight control of diabetes, do not hesitate to call your colleague for control. Number 2, right steroid dose at the right time, in the right duration, and stop at the right time. Do not exacerbate or do not give an extra dose. Patient education and a collaborative and a teamwork. That is where we would concur, and we will concur this mucormycosis. Thanks.
Fantastic. Nikhilesh? You're muted. You will have to unmute.
Please avoid unnecessary antibiotics. That would be one thing. And secondly, do not give steroids for longer and in larger doses than necessary. I'll just put it down.
Fantastic. So all these 4 faculties have given a very nice viewpoint about certain do's and don'ts, which is so much crucial, and tackling this case of mucormycosis, and to large extent, it is a preventable aspect. And we, as a clinician, we need to do it. It is our responsibility to do so. And probably if we can do it, it will be a large help to our patients. After listening, we really realized Sir Isaac Newton's word that what we know is a drop, what we don't know is an ocean, which is so much true in this subject, where there are so much gray areas are there, and probably we will learn more and more over a period of time. Thank you so much. I thank all the panelists, and it is over to you, Mamta.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ketan Mehta. Thank you, panelists, everyone. And what Dr. Munjal had said, that these are the most difficult times and probably the worst times doctors have faced, both emotionally, that it's quite draining, and we would never want to see any of our patients facing it. And what Ketan rightly said, that what Newton had said, that ocean of it, knowledge what we don't know. And the best way of knowing what we don't know is sharing. And that's what today's panelists have done. They've shared the information, they've shared their clinical experience. And these are these kind of a forums which Macleods helps us so that we can share information and help our patients better. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Munjal. Thank you, Nikhilesh, Dr. Altamas, Dr. Reddy, Dr. Ketan Mehta, all of you all. Thank you so much. And thank you, Macleods. Over to you, Mr. Joshi.
So what a nice discussion as far as mucormycosis is concerned. Probably almost A to Z as far as mucormycosis discussed over here. With lighter side, if mucormycosis here, he would never like to remain here after listening all these discussions are concerned. Okay. Thank you all the panelists. It's a really nice discussion. Dr. Reddy, Dr. Mehta, Dr. Nikhilesh, and Dr. Altamas, Dr. Munjal. Thank you so much. And there was a sizable number of delegates, more than 5,000. I hope they must have been benefited as far as this discussion is concerned. Thank you to all of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I would just want to say it across. We had more than 1,500 questions which had been put across.
Wow.
And though a lot of repetitions were there because the delegates cannot see whether the same question has been put across. But that's the kind of a level of information that every doctor is wanting to learn about it.
Wow.
Thank you
nice.
so much.
Excellent. Yeah. Thank
you
you
so much.
Thank you once again to all of you
very much.
Thank you.
Thank you to
Take
Team
care.
Medways.
Bye.
Thanks, Mr. Patil, and entire Macleods team also. Thank you, doctors, everyone. Have a great evening.
Thank you.
Enjoy yourself. Bye.
All of you.